Second.
Morning, everyone. If we could find our places, we have quorum, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived in the city's website. Other individuals in the media may also be audibly and or visually recording this meeting. I'd also ask that remind you to put your Blackberries, cell phones, pagers on manner mode. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chairman, there are no changes.
May I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Pearson Johnson on the motion. All those in favor? Carried. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest to be noted on any item before us? None are noted. Madam Clerk, item 3, you have before you the minutes of our March 24th meeting. Any errors or omissions? If not, a motion to approve. Johnson, Pearson, discussion. All those in favor? The motion is carried. There are no delegation requests. Members of the committee, you have before you consent items 5.1 and 5.2. Would you like to raise any of them for discussion? If not, a motion to receive items 5.1 and 5.2 would be in order. Is that your motion, Councillor Pearson? Okay. Seconded by Johnson. Question, Councillor, please. Which item, please?
On 5.1.
Okay.
And it's related to the wireless infrastructure. I know we were in the process of dismantling the project that we had in place for a number of years. And I'm just curious to know when we'd be in a position to, when that system is shut down and when the infrastructure itself would be removed from wherever it's being stored.
Mr. Zagaric, you're in a position to answer that?
Through you, Chair, we can provide that information. I haven't that information before me today, but we can provide that via an email to all committee members.
Okay. Perhaps distributed to all members of council, which I think is not a courtesy. Anything further on any of the items, ladies and gentlemen? On a motion to receive items 5.1 and 5.2, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. There are no public hearings. There are no presentations. We have a few discussion items before us. Item 1 is the retention of emails. Discussion. So it's moved by Collins, seconded by Pearson. But Councillor Pearson, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the report and certainly, what's required for staff to pursue this. My only question, and I guess we'll obviously get some orientation at some time about maintaining records, but through you, Mr. Chairman, to the clerk, Ms. Caterini, I'm sure our IT is aware. There is a program, and I'm not sure if this would simplify us going in the future, and I've only been made aware of it. There is a program that's available where when people send you emails and you disconnect from that chain and send something else, there is a program that actually puts all those emails in sequence. So that if you call up, you get them. I don't know if we're aware of that, but I know of another community, it's actually a university that uses that program. And I was quite intrigued that such a situation or such a, stat was available, whether we should maybe look at pursuing that, and that it would simplify our retention of emails, because now you would have the whole chain of whatever came in on specific items. Through you, Mr. Chairman, can I ask?
Ms. Caterini, please.
Mr. Chairman, through you, we're not specifically aware of that program, but we can certainly look into it with our IT division and advise members of this committee.
And I know where it is, Mr. Chairman, so I can put it on the record. I know that my daughter says at Nipissing University, they have that program where everything is created in a chain. And I was amazed because I know sometimes you can have emails, and if you keep paper records and then you try and follow back, there may be a disconnect, and then there's another one you're trying to track it. But this program actually keeps them all in sequence. So I'm not sure if that may help in the retention of records for our system.
So thank you very much for offering to do the homework in order to get that information and pass it on to the clerks. Councillor Clark, please.
I wanted to thank our staff for working through this process. I was the one that had raised the concern after seeing what was happening at Queen's Park and all the nonsense and the back and forth, and I wanted to verify that the emails, that when we delete them from our system, that they're being saved somewhere in a hard system. Asking around, each councillor does it slightly differently. Some have backups on their machine to save them into that, and the policy had not been looked at in a number of years. So this actually clarifies it for everyone and make sure that everyone understands what their responsibilities are, and that emails can't accidentally get lost, I guess, is the euphemism that's being used elsewhere. So I want to thank Rose, Lisa, and the whole gang for helping us with this. It just makes us that much more professional, so we know we have this backed up somewhere. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, thank you. And Rose, I'd like to have an offline conversation with you about this, because being new, first time, first term, it wasn't, I don't think it was very clearly laid out to me what is available, what's not, and what I should be doing and not doing. When I'm hearing backup systems, I just panicked. So if you and I can have an offline conversation about that, that would be great. Thanks.
Councillor Clark, will you take the chair? Could, my question to you, Ms. Catarini, is will this, I'm going to call it the mandatory employee training / council training, be in place for the new council taking office, either part of their orientation or in place by I'm going to say the 1st of December?
Through you, Madam Chair. That is our intention. If the funds are approved, we'll get this in place, certainly for orientation of the new council. And if we can get it organized this year, we'll certainly do our best efforts to get some training done this year as well.
I'm just thinking that if indeed we can have it in place, it would be very, very advantageous to have that training available and prescribed for each member of the new council, so they know what the rules of engagement are going forward and it's not going back. I'll take the chair back. I have on a motion moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Item 8.2 is the employer paid parking value for money audit management action plan. What's the pleasure, committee? Moved by Collins, seconded by Johnson. Councillor Collins, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And as the report states, we're almost to the halfway point in terms of the savings, I guess the savings that were identified in the first round of the audit. I'm just curious to know what the outstanding potential savings that are listed in Appendix A, how will they come back to committee, knowing that this is going to be taken off the outstanding business list? Is that something that we'll see, that the new council will see in the 2015 budget, or is it something that will have to flow through future internal audits?
Mr. Zagarek, I see the authors of the report are Beth and Lisa. It looks like Beth's hands up. Ms. Goodyear?
Through you, Mr. Chair, with the management action plan that's been developed, the information would come back on an annual basis that the general managers are reviewing. Excuse me. The process hasn't been formalized, though, to include a report back to council. Audit would also be doing a follow-up audit, so I think that would be a question for Anne as to how that process would unfold with respect to the check-ins on the audits as they are normally done.
Supplemental, Councillor?
Well, I'd like to formalize something. I don't know if I want to just do it on the fly this morning, but something should come back to council knowing that there are almost still $100,000 that could be saved if, in fact, we find that over 100 individuals do not continue to comply with the policy and are not eligible. So maybe I can, between now and council, speak to staff about how that formally comes back, just so it's not lost. I mean, we reviewed this policy a couple of years ago, and already we're in a situation where, there's $200,000 almost in
Cost avoidance.
well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's costing us money, so I don't want us to slip again and find out 18 months from now that the corporation is incurring the same costs when we clearly know what the policy is. So anyway, I'll give that some thought, and I appreciate the answers.
Okay. Ms. Goodyear?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I also wanted to clarify that there was a thorough review done of the eligibility by all of the general managers, and through this review, no further savings are expected. So these were all deemed to be required for their for the jobs and based on the policy. So this is important that I would expect that this number would be fairly stable, that all of this is deemed to be necessary with respect to compliance to the policy.
Maybe your discussion would be with Ms. Pacarac with regards to the follow-up report that would come from the value for money audit. Councillor Clark, please.
Yeah, I'm just cognizant also that is the end of the term, so it gets even worse than that if there's any changeover. So it's within the power of this committee and this council to clearly approve this, remove it from that work list, but then add another item for review in January or whatever the case is, so it would get picked up again at that point. And I look to the clerk for assistance. I think that's the only way we would maintain that continuity that Councillor Collins is speaking of.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we certainly could ask for a report back in January.
Councillor Collins.
Or
whether
not remove it from the outstanding business list.
Councillor Collins, there's a couple of ways we could do it. But that way, at least you get the next check-in.
Councillor Pearson?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I concur with the previous speaker and Councillor Collins. And I'm just wondering, though, whether it would be more appropriate to request that it be an update in 1 year, and they continue the review. That way, we continue to see what savings and what opportunities are available. I'm not sure if staff wish to speak to that, but that may be a way of keeping this on the books. Also making staff aware that we're still monitoring this, we're still doing the audits, and whatever savings can be achieved, we can continue to do that. Through you two, I'm not sure who would like to respond to that.
Beth, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that would be a good solution to report back in approximately this time frame next year. It does take some time to do the closeout in the first quarter, so that would be appropriate to report back within a year.
Maybe the best approach might be to approve the motion we have here before us, knowing that it has to come to council, and those of you who have interest may finesse either a new motion or an addition to the motion when it finds its way to council. You okay with that? Okay. So on a motion it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Item 8.3 is the accounts receivable write-offs for March of 2014. Councillor Collins?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I noticed there's some older amounts here for some of the former hockey associations that operated out of both Scott Park and Eastwood, and it's the totals, knowing that they're almost a decade old in terms of their dates, but there's almost $100,000 here in terms of fees or costs that we could not collect from those, looks like bankrupt in both cases, associations. Are we running into any other challenges with some of the existing groups, knowing that hockey enrollment is down in some areas?
Who's in a position? Mr. Brown, please. Jack Brown.
Through the chair, no, we're not running into any problems with any other associations.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Pearson, question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and maybe through you to Mr. Zagaric, and I'm not sure, the Opera Hamilton one, I guess this is just one that keeps popping out at us. This isn't a recent, or is this is an old settlement issue, so this is over and beyond what we've been dealing with recently?
Through the chair, this is a dated issue going back to when they were hosted by HECFI, and in terms of the write-off, there was an allowance for doubtful receivables that it would be written off against.
Thank you. I just want to be sure, because we have the issue right now, and I want to be sure that the two aren't connected. Thank you.
So did I have a mover on the motion? No. Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Clark. On the motion, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Item 9.1 is a bylaw compliance by bidders to the City of Hamilton projects. Councillor Johnson, are you prepared to introduce your motion?
Yes, I am. I just need a seconder for this. Councillor Pearson. And if you'll recall that when we were looking at the tender process, I was noting there was a few of those companies within my own ward that I believe were not zoned to be situated there. So I was really having a conflict. We were telling the neighbors on one hand that we were taking care of it by bylaw, and then we're turning around giving them money for their contracts. So this, I'm hoping, will address that staff be directed to review the tender process to determine the feasibility of including a phase in the procedure which ensures staff have confirmed that bidders are compliant with the zoning and licensing bylaws prior to awarding a contract, and report back to Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee.
On the item?
Just some quick questions and then some comments. I see Mr. Mail here. If I could ask Mr. Mail a couple of questions. So is this going to be an onerous task to make sure that the companies have a zoned office in Hamilton or whatever the case is?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. We have gathered the information preparing the summary report as we speak. Basically, what we have found with there's only 2 municipalities that are looking at the zoning implications, and it's strictly on a complaint basis. Nobody has a process where they actually ensure that the bidders are compliant with all bylaws, and ones they are looking at are strictly zoning. They're not looking at the licensing aspects of it. So we will be bringing back a report which will speak to implications on the city's processes and on staffing issues in regards to verifying that the zoning is in place and that proper licensing is in place. The licensing is the part that causes me the concern, because a lot of our contracts have subcontractors. The general contractors are not required to name their subcontractors. If it's a trade involved, the subcontractors are the ones that would be holding the trade's licensing. So we have to look carefully at what would be involved in assessing that and ensuring that people were compliant.
Okay, so, Mr. Chairman, to be clear from what I think the intention was, and I was here when it was first discussed, as Councillor Johnson had learned of a couple of businesses in their area. I think they were landscaping that, and they were functioning without licensing or zoning on their property. So it doesn't sound like it's too large a task to have a bylaw that would indicate on a complaint basis our staff or municipal law enforcement would look into whether or not the business was properly zoned. Is that a correct statement?
Chair, that is correct. If we're doing it on a complaints basis, it's basically what we do today with the fair wage policy. We would just be amending the procurement tender documents to indicate what the repercussions would be if a complaint was launched, someone was found to be non-compliant, whether in fact there'd be an opportunity for the business to rectify the deficiency and become compliant, to move locations, whether it would be the immediate loss of the contract, whether it be a financial penalty. Have to work through with legal services, part of the report.
And likewise, that complaint doesn't necessarily need to be from a citizen. It could be from someone in municipal law enforcement who learns about it, notifies the office, or a counselor or counselor staff or anyone that's an employee of the city, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that one sounds pretty good. We could fix that one relatively fast. Now, the one I needed some clarification on was the issue with regards to the licensing. It sounded as though you found that that was going to be a challenge to see if they're licensed before we give them a tender?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The way the process is right now, our documents require any bidders to hold the proper licenses required to conduct that business. They're required to comply with all legislation. They're required to comply with zoning bylaws of the city and other bylaws of the city. The onus is on the vendor to do that. And if we were approached by another vendor that said that somebody was non-compliant with that, we'd investigate it and take appropriate action. But for us to investigate up front and ensure that people are holding the proper licenses before the contract is awarded would involve a totally different process and verification required. We have not yet met with Marty Hazel's group to look at the zoning licensing aspects of it. That's one of the last things we have to do before we can start putting that final report together.
Ask is if it's possible to do things like the old Ministry of Transportation used to do, and simply ask that they had to photocopy a current copy of their license with the municipality in which they were going to be working. Then there's no search.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is one option that we could do, for sure. But then you have the situation where they're not naming their subs, so we have to change our process to indicate that they have to name their subs so that we can ensure that we get copies of any certificates and licensing that's associated with the sub.
Microphone, Councillor, please.
Do you do that now?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as I indicated previously, it's on a complaint basis right now. We just have a declaration within the document, and by the bidder submitting the bid and signing it, they're agreeing that they will comply with all licensing, legislation, zoning, et cetera, and all bylaws.
So again, just from my experience, you request the copy of the license of the fellow that's filing the tendering. That's now the contractor who he subcontracts with, and all that other stuff is his responsibility. Once WSIB walks through and starts looking for things, I'm sure everyone's going to have all the proper documentation there. So I think we pretty much got it covered by simply saying we need a copy of the license if you're going to tender, and that the complaint basis would continue. Doesn't that seem reasonable?
Mr. Chair, we will definitely talk to bylaw and legal about amending the process to incorporate that in place and identify any issues, if there are any, in following that kind of simplified process.
And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm pretty comfortable that, because I thought about it for the last 2 weekends and figuring out how it could actually work. And we don't need to make a giant mountain out of a molehill. It's really a simple process to ensure that the checks and balances are in place. When we start piling on all the objections, then it becomes something that seems to be insurmountable when it really isn't. So I support this going forward, and I look forward to an easy solution.
Just a reminder is that the motion is asking for a review. So in other words, I think all the comments that we've made here, I think will contribute to the review in order to come back and put in a process. Councillor Johnson, please.
Yeah, just to finish up, just to make this very, very clear, when you read the tendering process and you look at that list, you're looking at the company name. You're not looking at the subcontractor or the contractor or the person they hired or the neighbor next door. You're looking at the name of the business. We have one department who has sent that business a cease and desist letter, and then we have another department who's awarded over $500,000 to the same company. The perception is horrible. So this is the part I want to get cleared up immediately if we can, because it's just, it really does make this look like a joke, and I don't want it to be a joke. And I think that you work very hard in getting the right tender and making the jobs work. I get that. But when we have another department on this side who's working very hard with me trying to get these companies to be zoned properly or even moved to the proper zoning space, then it's defeating everybody's hard work too. So I appreciate this. I want to see this come back as soon as we can. That'd be wonderful. So I moved it, seconded with Councillor Pearson.
Councillor Pearson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly have the pleasure of seconding this for Councillor Johnson. I understand the issues that she's dealing with in more of the rural area of Glanbrook, et cetera. And if anything, this is a message that goes out to the business owners, say, you know what, make sure you follow the rules. And I think that's basically the gist of where we've been moving along in Hamilton over the last 14 years, making sure you follow the rules, that you've got what you need to be in place. So this is just one more step, and I appreciate, and I certainly, I know he's worked very hard in being sure that, especially our tendering process, it's mind-boggling. If anybody has seen the paperwork alone, but never mind even doing it, the whole process is absolutely mind-boggling. And I try and stress to residents, why sometimes they don't get tenders, is that, it's such a intrigued process that one little thing can kick you out. But making sure you follow the rules in your zoning and your licensing, that should be simple. So I appreciate what the councillors put forward today.
We ready for the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Are there any notices of motion? None are noted. Madam Clerk, under general information, we have a change of a due date. What's the pleasure, committee? Pearson, seconded by Collins. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Any general information? Anyone? No private and confidential. On a motion by Johnson, seconded by Clark, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.